The Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Joel Villanueva will lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Let me quote Psalm 23, Psalm of David, King James Version of the Holy Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I would dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thank you, Almighty God, for your word. Indeed, they are life for those who find them, and health to all their flesh. We come before you, humbling ourselves, knowing without you we can do nothing. Today we ask that you forgive our sins in words, in thoughts, and in deeds, and help us to become holy, to become, for our lives to become holy and acceptable to you. Remind us, O Lord, that life here on earth is temporary, and that we should continue to invest in eternity, in serving you, in loving you, in honoring your holy name. Bless everyone here. Bless the entire Senate. Bless our President, our Vice President, the entire Executive and Judiciary as well. And into your hands we commend everything as we give back to you all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise. In the name that is above every name, in the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Villanueva. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I move that we defer the approval of the journal of the 67th session, Monday, February 27, 2017, at a later hour.
The motion is to defer. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, for the record, the Senate President, Senator Aquilino Pimentel III, has received a letter from Senator Laila de Lima. It reads, "Dear Senate President Pimentel, this is to give notice that I am formally withdrawing from the majority in order to join the minority bloc in the Senate. Truly yours, Laila M. de Lima." I'd like to place it on record, Mr. President.
The manifestation is made of record, and we also make of record the numbers. 18 belong to the majority and 6 to the minority.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would like to acknowledge guests in the gallery today. We have the guests of Senator Subiri and Villar, Mr. Bert Lenton, Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention on Migratory Species, Ms. Stein Roncari, the Administration and Services Officer, also the Director Teresa Lim from the Biodiversity Management Bureau, also Mayor Abdul Wahid Sahidullah from the Municipality of Tongkil, Sulu, guests of Senator Ejercito, Bishop Emeritus Ramon Cabrera Arguelles, former Lipa Archbishop and Company, the members of Alianza Tigil Mina, members of Global Catholic Climate Movement Philippines, February 28. Lorenzo Ruiz de Manila School students, also headed by Miss Ria Clarissa Vicente, and Siena College of Taytay, headed by Mr. Eduardo Evangelista. Also, another guest of Senator Subiri, board members of Bukidnon, led by Vice Governor Kalingasan. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Secretary, let's do the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. 1352, an act providing for a comprehensive nuclear regulation, creating for the purpose the Philippine Nuclear Regulatory Commission and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Soto III.
Referred to the Committees on Science and Technology, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means and Finance.
1356, an act institutionalizing the Balik Scientist Program, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Science and Technology, Ways and Means and Finance.
1357, an act expanding the purposes and application of the Special Education Fund, amending for the purpose Section 272 of Republic Act Number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, and for other purposes, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Local Government and Education, Arts and Culture.
1358, an act providing free dormitories for students enrolled in state universities and colleges and appropriating funds thereof, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and Finance.
Resolutions. Resolution number 303, resolution calling for the Department of Transportation to re-evaluate the registration of all buses in the country by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Public Services.
304, resolution directing the proper Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged dysfunctional and defective new Metro Rail transit coaches. Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Public Services.
305, resolution declaring vacant the office of the Senate President pro tempore and electing Senator Ralph Recto as successor thereof, introduced by Senators Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao, Soto III, Lacson, Honasan II, Ligarda, Cynthia Villar, Richard Gordon, Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay, Grace Poe, Sani Angara, Win Gatchalian, Joel Villanueva, Joseph Victor Ejercito, Aquilino Coco Pimentel III, Cayetano Ansoberi.
To the Archives.
Communications. Letter from the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs submitting to the Senate the report to Congress on assistance to nationals for the period January to June 2016 in CD digital format pursuant to Section 33 of Republic Act Number 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 as amended by Republic Act 10022.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Foreign Relations.
Letter from the National Irrigation Administration dated 17 January 2017, submitting to the Senate calendar year 2016 fourth quarter progress report of Mindanao Sustainable Agrarian and Agricultural Development Project, IDAR, Foreign Assisted Project implemented by NIA in support to the successful implementation of CARP.
To the Committee on Agrarian Reform.
Committee reports. Committee report number 440 prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Health and Demography, Justice and Human Rights, and Ways and Means on Senate Bill number 1353 with Senator Risa Hontiveros as author thereof, entitled An Act Increasing the Penalties for the Refusal of Hospitals and Medical Clinics to administer appropriate initial medical treatment and support in emergency or serious cases, amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 702, otherwise known as an act prohibiting the demand of deposits or advance payments for the confinement or treatment of patients in hospitals and medical clinics in certain cases as amended by Republic Act number 8344 and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 216. Sponsor, Senator Risa Hontiveros.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report number 41, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government, Finance, on Senate Bill number 1354 with Senators Soto III, Ligarda, Trillanes IV, Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV, Sani Angara, Risa Ontiveros, and Joel Villanueva as authors thereof, entitled An Act Establishing a National Mental Health Policy for the purpose of enhancing the delivery of integrated mental health services, promoting and protecting persons utilizing psychiatric, neurologic, and psychosocial health services, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 9, 415, 522, 657, 1155, and 1190. Senator Risa Hontiveros.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report number 42, prepared and submitted jointly by the Economic Affairs and Trade and Commerce and Entrepreneurship on Senate Bill number 1355 with Senators Ligarda and Win Gatchalian as authors thereof, entitled An Act Adopting Innovation as Vital Component of the Country's Development Policies to Drive Inclusive Development, Promote the Growth and National Competitiveness of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bill number 38. Sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Ano pa? Majority Leader.
President, Senator Bam Aquino wishes to be recognized.
Any objection? There being none, Senator Aquino is recognized.
Mr. President, on behalf of the minority, we would like to nominate Senator Frank Drilon as our minority floor leader.
So the election of Senator Drilon as minority leader.
I second the nomination, Mr. President, and I move to close the period of nomination.
Senator Drilon, you're
Thank you very
recognized.
much, Mr. Major. I'm sorry. There is no other nomination, Mr. President. Can we make by election official?
Yes, I was about to do that. So with the manifestation and there being no other candidate and no vote, no number of votes required under our rules, the election of Senator Drilon as minority leader is hereby made official.
Mr. President,
Yeah, Senator Drilon.
yes, may we nominate in behalf of the minority Senator Benigno, Senator Aquino, Bam Aquino, as our assistant minority leader.
Yes, the nomination of Senator Aquino as the assistant minority leader is hereby noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 14 under Committee Report number 30.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the proposed amendments to the revised penal code. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're now in the period of interpellation. So may we recognize the sponsor, the chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes, the minority leader, Senator Franklin Drilon, and to interpellate Senator Pampilo Ping Lacson.
Senator Drilon, Senator Lacson are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will no longer interpolate. I will just make a manifestation seeking clarification and assurance from the distinguished sponsor who probably more than anyone else in this hall has extensive knowledge as well as legislative experience. No? And I can say that with conviction, as a matter of fact.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The assurance that I'm asking from the distinguished sponsor is that there will be no distortion in the imposition of fines on offenses that are similar in nature, more so with the same effect and damage to the individuals concerned, whether offender or offended. No. Having said that, let me just mention, say, a violation of the revised penal code, malversation, paragraph 1 of Article 217 of the revised penal code. Amount involved in the misappropriation or malversation does not exceed 200 pesos. So ang penalty rito, prison correctional in its medium and maximum periods, 2 years, 4 months, and 1 day to 6 years. Currently, yung amount involved, 200 pesos, ngayon magiging 20,000. Is that correct?
The formula is the present amount stated in the present law is divided by 2 pesos and 50 centavos.
Anyway, we already
and
computed.
multiply that by 500, and that will be the formula. That is the formula applied,
Okay.
Mr. President.
Anyway, juxtapose that with Section 3 of RA 3019, or Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. The crimes punishable, among others, are influencing another public official, requesting or receiving gift, accepting or having member of family accept employment from private enterprise with pending official business, causing, etc., etc. 6 years and 1 month to 15 years. Wala pong amount involved. So, 20,000, yung dating 200, compare it now sa kaso ng malversation, special law. No? Walang amount involved. So, somehow, di ba merong inequality or distortion do sa amount of fines na inimpose on both offenses na ang gravity at saka yung nature medyo similar. So I'd like to, this is not an interpellation, distinguished sponsor, I just would like to have an assurance that cases like this or crimes or offenses like this will be treated similarly in terms of fines that will be imposed.
Firstly, for the record, Mr. President, we did not touch special laws, only the revised penal code. But the concept being proposed by the good senator is not is acceptable, and we will make sure that that concept will find its way into whatever revisions that we will make. Maybe we can make a special adjustment, but conceptually, similar crimes should have approximately similar penalties.
Another case in point, treason against acts or violation of RA 9165, Dangerous Drugs Act. Ano? Sa treason, of course, penalty of imprisonment, reclusion perpetua to death. Ano? Kung meron death penalty. Yung current fine dito, 100,000. By virtue of RA 7659, yung Death Penalty Act. Ano? Originally, 20,000 ito noong 1993. Under the proposal, it is now 4 million pesos. Now, let's go to violations of the Dangerous Drugs Act. Reclusion perpetua to death, pareho rin, assuming na merong death penalty. Ang fine involved dito, from 500,000 pesos to 10 million. Ang destructive effect o yung gravity ng offense, no? Treason against Dangerous Drugs Act, mukhang pareho rin. So, 4 million against 10 million, medyo may distortion. So, again, ito, ano lang to, mga kasong minimension lang ito, just to highlight or emphasize the point na at the proper time, baka naman ma-welcome nyo yung mga amendments that I will introduce.
Mr. President, as I said, conceptually, we have absolutely no problem. But this is but we have limited the amendments to the revised penal code. Just to show our sincerity and good faith in accommodating the very correct concept of of Senator Lacson. As we review the penalties, we are willing to file, together with Senator Lacson, if necessary, a corresponding bill which will address the special laws that you are.
Yeah.
That
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor. As a matter of fact, that's the point I'm trying to
Yes.
drive at, ano, na parang corollarily,
yes.
pag nag-adjust tayo ng penalties, baka pwedeng isama na natin yung... I remember si Senator De Lima, no, meron siyang Code of Crimes bill.
Oh.
Eh, medyo naiwan, nakulong pa nga. So, baka mahirap natin maipasa, baka maiwan. Another point,
Just to that point, sir.
Yes.
Yes, if feasible, we will introduce it as amendments. If
Okay.
feasible. But if not technically feasible,
Baka maging rider.
bakibaging rider or marami pang ibang batas na dapat baguhin, then we will draft with the assistance and guidance of Senator Lacson a new bill which will address all of these concerns so that we can make it so that we can make the penalty correspond
Rational, yeah.
to the acts committed.
Last na lang po, last
Yes, sir.
point before I end my manifestation, which parang hybrid na rin ng interpellation. Yung impossible crime. No? Ito walang masyadong damage. Say a person shoots a dead person not knowing that he's already dead. Eh meron ding fine na 200 to 500 pesos. So under the proposal, magiging 40,000 to 100,000. Now, compare that to a crime of slight physical injury. May nasaktan. Eh, ang wala ngang no alternative penalty of fine. Eh, pero nasaktan yung tao, ito naman patay, hindi na masasaktan. So, ito yung mga points that I would like to raise para ma-rationalize lamang at saka mawalan ng distortion do sa mga pinopropose na mga fines on certain offenses. At any rate, I'd like to thank the distinguished sponsor for accommodating our suggestion, our proposal, and at the proper time, maybe we can work together to introduce the corresponding individual amendments. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, distinguished sponsor.
We assure Senator Lacson that we can work with him and we will work with him in order to come up with a more equitable version of this bill, which is nothing more but upgrading the penalty or upgrading the values of the money from 1930 to today, so that the penalties will not be considered as cruel, which will raise constitutional issues. So we thank the good sponsor, the good senator from Cavite, for the inputs that he has done, and we will, when we take a second look for process of committee amendments, we will be in close consultation with Senator Lacson.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
there being no other member who has made reservations to interpolate, I move to close the period of interpolation on Senate Bill 14 under Committee Report Number 30.
Any objection? Hearing none, period is closed.
I move to open the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
May we request that we be allowed to submit the committee amendments at subsequent sessions, given the proposed amendments and the manifestations of Senator Lacson, which we'll have to input into the amendments that we will put in.
I withdraw my motion, Mr. President. I withdraw my motion
Motion is deemed withdrawn.
and give notice to the members of the Senate that the committee amendments will be prepared by the minority leader, and those who have individual amendments, may we ask that they prepare their individual amendments as soon as the committee amendments are brought forward. Just for the record, Mr. President. So with that, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 14 under Committee Report Number 30.
Before we close, before we suspend, place of record, Mr. President, that Senator De Lima has manifested that she is a co-sponsor to this measure, and we accept the co-sponsorship. Co-author.
Co-authorship. So any objection to the motion to suspend? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
What's the number, what's the measure, Majority Leader?
1233, Mr. President.
Any
The coconut-
objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on creating the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So may we move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Francis Pangilinan, and to interpellate Senator Recto, Gordon, Escudero, and Pacquiao. Senator Recto has withdrawn his reservations to interpellate, so
Mr. President, with the permission of the
Senator
majority.
Pangilinan is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, yesterday we had a discussion with Senator Recto because he was still interpellating when we last tackled this measure, Mr. President. But he has agreed that he will end his interpellation without prejudice to raising clarificatory questions during the period of amendments, Mr. President. For the record, Mr. President.
Thank you. So, who wants to be recognized for interpellation? Senator
I just
Senator
want
Recto.
to, Mr. President, I just want to confirm the manifestation made by by the chairman of the committee. Thank you.
So it will be a hybrid amendment process also. Okay.
But the former chairman, Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President, may I move for a 1-minute suspension?
Any objection? Session is suspended. Hindi, Queenie.
Thank you.
Hindi pa, Senator. Majority Leader, ready na po.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, before the suspension, we asked that the chairman, well, the former chairman, and now Senator Francis Pangilinan, be recognized to continue the sponsorship of Senate Bill 1233, the Coco Levy. And now I move to recognize Senator D. Gordon to interpellate, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you very much, Majority Floor Leader. With the permission of the President and with the permission of the distinguished sponsor, I'd like to ask a few questions, if I may.
With pleasure to my senior brad in the Upsilon, Mr.
Be
President.
careful, because brads are now a dangerous, predicament. Kasi you consider the Lex Talionis.
That is true, Mr. President.
Now,
Lex Million.
Lex Billones. Billones. I did not say that. Senate President Drilon said that. I suggest we take it out of the record. Now, Mr. President, the coconut industry represents 3.5 million farmers. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, Mr. President.
And about 20 million families. Is that correct?
20 to a little over, yes, more than 20 million, but around that number, Mr.
But they have remained poor.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Why have they remained poor? Is it because of the levy alone, or is it because the government has not really provided the wherewithal upon which they could improve their lives?
Well, Mr. President, I believe it will be more of the latter, Mr. President, that
The government has failed.
yes, has failed to provide the necessary interventions so that the farmer's incomes increases, the latest technologies are employed so that there is value adding to the product. By and large, Mr. President, the main crop is still copra, and copra is the lowest in terms of value adding for the coconut industry, Mr.
But of course, there are other things that make that happen. For example, is there still a monopoly within the coconut industry that corners the price of coconut meat, for example?
Mr. President, I'm not aware of a monopoly per se, but I would like to think, Mr. President, that the big
understand.
traders,
Excuse me, I understand that there are three. I'm still trying to get their names. There are 3 or 4 big buyers of copra meat that manage to keep the prices low and keep the people poor. They buy low and they sell high, or they process.
that is possible, Mr. President. Yes, there are big players that purchase these products, Mr. President, and are able to bring down the price, because also the farmer, the average farm size, Mr. President, would be around a hectare or a hectare and a half. Our coconut farmers precisely also don't have the clustering which will allow them to have economies of scale. And so therefore, Mr. President, they are at the mercy of the traders and the buyers, Mr.
I
President.
think it's important that we understand the whole business of the coconut industry, because a lot of people depend on it and they remain poor and they have been, as you say, exploited. I don't know whether you can term it such, because now they are rich by about 90 billion pesos.
Well, 100 billion, 90 to 100, yes, Mr.
100
President.
billion and change, yes.
That's correct,
Now,
Mr.
the
President.
ladies behind you, are they from the Philippine Coconut Authority?
No, they are from my staff, Mr. President.
Is there anybody from the government representing the coconut industry?
Not today, Mr. President.
Well, I ask that because it's important for us to know what ails really the coconut industry. If there are people who are cornering the market and keeping our farmers low, and we know, you and I, the gentleman knows as much as I do, that there are people who corner rice, who corner sugar, and coconut.
Yes.
And I just wanted to find out, and I hope that you would favor me, the gentleman would favor me with an information on who these people are, so that we could really
We will.
unpeel this very, very bad banana.
We will do so,
that's
Mr.
being
President.
faced upon us.
We will do so, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now, when you talk about the coconut industry, how much land does the coconut constitute the coconut industry in this country?
Around 3.5 million hectares, Mr. President.
And how much does Indonesia have?
We don't have the information now, Mr. President, but
Yes, I'm sure.
it would be much larger, Mr. President.
Yes, I understand that I've been asking around that Indonesia represents at least 3.5 times or 4 times much more than the coconut industry of the Philippines. And yet, when you look at the production of coconuts, Indonesia produces 18.3 million tons of coconut, and the Philippines is the second in Asia, and they represent 15,353 metric tons, which means that with limited land, at 3 million, we're able to produce, and the chart will show you, much more than in Indonesia that has plenty of land. I think it speaks for itself.
Yes, Mr. President, that is correct.
So it really means that we are not really paying attention to the productivity and the value added that must go into coconut industry, the many products that it produces that can make people rich. We are sticking to the tingi market. Kumbaga ko na yung patingi-tingi pero yung talagang medyo dapat pasukan ay dapat hindi napapasok. Bakit ho kaya? Why is that so?
Mr. President, again, because of the lack of support for the farmer, they are limited to the supplying the raw material, which is precisely the copra. The strategy really is to provide them the necessary technology, the training, capacity building, so that they can do value adding of their products, not limited to copra alone, which is 50 pesos a day if they are to do copra. But, for example, if they are to do cocoa coir or cocoa nuts or virgin coconut oil or cocoa water, Mr. President, then the value of these products are infinitely or much more, much larger, Mr. President, than just copra, Mr. President.
In other words, Mr. President, it is quite obvious that the problem lies in the fact that we have not really supported the industry, not just the farmers, but those who will want to invest in the coconut industry.
That is correct, Mr. President.
I mean,
Because
there are many rich people in this country that feel that the coconut prices are too low. They are not going to break a sweat to try and invest their money, and they would rather invest it in some place where they would get quicker returns.
that is correct, Mr. President.
Having said that, Mr.
Yes.
President, nonetheless, I will stand corrected here. I'll correct myself. Indonesia has 10 million, actually 3.5 times more than our land devoted to coconut. And Malaysia, which is number 10 in production, they produce 646,000 metric tons. They have 6 million hectares, which means that we are definitely infinitely more productive than our Asian cousins. So maybe the problem is to try and nudge government to try and pay attention more to the coconut industry, rather than coming up another time, another bureaucracy. And I'm not, the jury in my case is not out on that yet. But is it not true the reason why people are discouraged from going into the coconut industry is the science or the value added that can be generated in the coconut industry is not being undertaken? Who are the leaders? Who lead the coconut industry right now? Is it the Philippine Coconut Authority? Is it the Ministry of Energy or another Environment and Natural Resources? Or is it Ministry of Agriculture?
It is the Philippine Coconut Authority has his primary, primary mandate to develop the coconut industry, Mr.
So it would appear that the Philippine Coconut Authority has failed abysmally.
In that respect, yes, Mr. President.
What other respect are we supposed to take?
Well, yes. Well, Mr. President, that is correct. When we stepped in, for example, and took over the chairmanship of the Philippine Coconut Authority, 50% of our coconut trees were nutrient deficient. around 18% of our coconut trees were senile, meaning old, and 80%, Mr. President, of our coconut lands were monocrop, meaning the only crop was the coconut. All these, Mr. President, will tell us that precisely not enough was being done to address the challenges of the industry and the coconut farmers, Mr.
And yet, in spite of that, in 2015, we produced more coconut than everybody else. And if we use the science of creating, as you say, value added, we should be making a lot more money in coconut.
That is correct, Mr. President. Just to cite an example, we produce 15 billion nuts.
Is that literally? Does that include people like here
That
in
does
the
not
Senate
include
Congress?
people in government like me, Mr. President.
Yes.
But that is 15 billion nuts is the estimated amount of coconuts that we produce annually. And each coconut, or 5 coconuts, will give you 1 liter of cocoa water. And therefore, if you divide it by 5, we actually have 3 billion liters of cocoa water annually. Yet, of that 3 billion liters, Mr. President, because of the lack of technology, the lack of capital, as pointed out, the investments, maybe 2 billion, this is just off the top of my head, Mr. President, because the largest producer of cocoa water in the country is producing anywhere between 300 to 1 million liters of coconut a month. And
I agree with the gentleman, Mr. President. Precisely because Thailand produces much more coconut water than we do. And yet they don't even figure they're number 9 in coconut production. Brazil is number 4. And yet they produce a lot of coconut water. And
Yes.
in fact, the previous president in the last administration said that we should now have a future in coconut water. But obviously, that has not happened.
yes, almost 3 billion liters actually are thrown away because of the primary crop practice of securing the copra. So there is really so much wastage.
So we're throwing away a value-added commodity in favor of a low-value commodity,
That is correct, Mr.
which
President.
means, are we lazy?
No, Mr. President, I'd like to think there is lack because securing the water, the cocoa water, is like the milk as a parallelism, perhaps, or as to compare it. You need to have the necessary technology to make sure that the cocoa water does not spoil.
Oil, yes.
And so you need to have capital to be able to get that. It's like processing, cold storage, processing of the cocoa water, ensuring that it is properly handled so that you don't have spoilage. It would be like the milk industry, Mr. President. You need to have equipment. You need to have the necessary pasteurization of the milk, Mr. President. And again, it is not easy to do that unless you have the necessary technology and the necessary infrastructure and equipment, Mr.
We
President.
did some computations with the staff, Your Honor, and for 5,000 kilograms of coconut per day, it will cost us 10.8 million to have a composting facility, 229,000 for cocoa water processing facility, which would include drilling bins, drilling press, water collection, receiving vessel, kawa, furnace, coconut preparation, inspecting, sorting, which is costs us a 1 million, and so forth and so on, feed tank, centrifuge processing. Doesn't sound like a big amount, Your Honor. It sounds like how much coconut water can we produce with 5,000 kilograms? I would like to be surprised.
My data is that for every for every 5 nuts is 1 liter. So the average weight of 1 nut, I don't have the data now, but we can actually get it, Mr. President.
Maybe the gentleman can provide the Senate with that so we can make a better
We will-
purchase on how to make the decision on this matter that we're discussing now.
We will do so, Mr. President.
All right. At the same time, one of the key problems also is transportation, is it not?
That is correct, Mr.
The
President.
cost of transporting, and that's the reason why I attributed it to a little bit of laziness, or lack of entrepreneurship is the better phrase, not laziness. Meaning to say that they would rather have these middlemen who buy it for the copra giants or the coconut meat giants buy their coconut meat, pera na kahit na maliit ang kita, instead of coming up and the government helping them with maybe ways upon which they can transport their product to the coconut water facilities or to the coconut mills, so that they can bring it to the market faster. Would that be correct?
That is correct, Mr. President. The challenge really, Mr. President, is to cluster these coconut farms. Because if they are clustered, for example, you have an average farmer would have 1 hectare. So if you have 50 hectares, then that will mean 50 farmers coming together. They will now be able to, if you cluster them and organize them into cooperatives or an enterprise, they can now spread the cost, for example, of a transport vehicle, instead of just one farmer having to figure out how he will transport his very small amount of coconuts to bring to the...
So that would be a worthy cost to be pursued, wouldn't it?
Yes, Mr. President.
And at the same time, it will be a worthy cost to pursue if you were to educate the farmer into planting black pepper
Yes, Mr. President.
in between coconut trees, or
Cacao, Mr.
cacao,
President.
coffee,
Coffee, yes, Mr. President.
and this is really ideal for them, right?
That is correct, Mr. President. It is unique. The scientists have said that the coconut tree is actually a social, if there is a social animal, there is also a social tree.
A social what?
A social tree. The coconut tree is supposed to be a social tree in that if there are more crops around it, its yields improve, Mr. President. And so it's ironic that 80% of your coconut lands are monocrop.
Precisely. We seem to know the problem. We know that we need transportation. You know that you want to do value added. If that is the case, why can we not use the money for cocoa levy for these matters, for these things,
This is yes.
in a cogent manner?
Yes, this is precisely the purpose of this measure, Mr. President, is that the fund, the cocoa levy fund, will be used to fund the coconut enterprise development program, which will be included actually in a coconut industry development plan to be approved by the President, Mr. President.
Well, that is precisely the problem. I think, would it not be better if we force the coconut industry, PCA, after all, they're paid, they're an agency of the government. If they're not doing their job, why don't we force them to create this coconut master plan? Instead of us creating a law in which we are going to create another bureaucracy, instead of keeping the money, let's say you have a bank that is 77% controlled by the government, UCPB or San Miguel, why don't we leave the money there first and allow it to grow some more? In the meantime, get the coconut industry, Philippine Coconut Authority, to come up with a master plan, because I don't see that master plan happening with this new administration, quite frankly.
Well, Mr. President, in fact, there have been previous master plans put together with the help of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, the NAPSI, the National Anti-Poverty Commission, went through a process of consultations, putting together the roadmaps. But I think in the end, all these roadmaps are left at the level of the theoretical per se, which now requires precisely, if the gentleman was, if I am correctly understanding the gentleman, that the PCA should be able to put together and execute.
Yes, Your Honor. Are we bereft of continuity and consistency that we can actually utilize the agricultural education program in our country so that all these things can be planned together with the, let's say, the SUCs, the UP, the Agricultural College, and have one big meeting and say, all right, we are going to have the Empire Strike Back. We're going to be number one in the coconut industry. We're going to be number one in value added. We're going to have a plan so that the farmer will have that ability to lift himself by his own bootstraps, allow him to get, multivariate crops so that he could do that. And why can we not do that with the SUCCs, Mr. President? To my mind, my suggestion is to put the SUCC to work. They have enough professors there in agricultural colleges all over the country. And if we use them as a way upon which you could provide them with money, then they could be the extension. I do not believe the Philippine Coconut Authority is possessed of sufficient extension workers to reach out to the farmer. And when they reach out to the farmer, it is not just the science, but also the attitude, the philosophy, the culture, that if they plant big, they can get bigger returns. Would that be a more feasible way of doing these things, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we agree that the academe, the SUCs, should play a critical role, an important role in being able to provide the necessary technology, the necessary capacity, and also, yes, as mentioned earlier, the training, so that we can change paradigms in terms of the thinking of farmers, coconut farmers, Mr. President. In fact, the Trust Fund Committee precisely is tasked to execute or implement the development plan, which should include the role of SUCs in the coconut enterprise development programs, Mr. President.
That's precisely why my problem is I do not want to create another bureaucracy when there is already a bureaucracy tasked to handle that. And in fact, they were preempted by the private sector masquerading, let us say, somebody is a group that would be good for the farmer. I don't know. I don't know if the jury is out there yet already. You cannot argue. You cannot argue with success. They have 100 billion. They have a bank that is controlled now by the government. They built the cultural center, the Coconut Palace, and many other things. Of course, these were extravagance to some people, but nonetheless, there are things that can be seen from the Coconut Fund that was utilized. And if the Coconut Fund is now utilized for the purpose of really overhauling the coconut industry, providing it with the transportation, providing universities with all the necessary technology, the money to research and to conduct extension work for the farmers, then I don't see why a country that can produce a lot more with little land than Indonesia and Malaysia and Brazil, but cannot even create their own coconut water that can be exported abroad. I don't know why we cannot do that and create a better mousetrap than creating another bureaucracy. You know, we always solve the problem by creating another bureaucracy, as if it is going to go away.
Yes.
It has been said that we are a task force-oriented society. And there's a problem with a task force tokhang, for example, task force, whatever. But in reality, what you need is predictability, consistency, and continuity.
That is, Mr. President, in an earlier interpellation of Senator Recto, he also raised the question of whether or not we're creating a new layer of the bureaucracy.
In fact, I talked with them about that. That's why, sabi ko, ikaw naman una, dahil pareho.
Yes. And he said, why don't we just strengthen the PCA, perhaps, lessen the number of members of the Trust Fund Committee to, instead of 5 or 6, just a smaller number in terms of the government representatives. I said, we are more than willing to look at a possible harmonizing of strengthening the PCA, and therefore at the proper time. I said during the period of amendments, we're more than willing to look at that so that we can avoid the concern that we are in fact creating a separate bureaucracy when maybe it would be better to strengthen an existing one, Mr.
So the Director and I talked about this before we even interpellated, and we both agreed that we may be creating another bureaucracy, another hydra, meaning to say it's different heads and then not knowing where to go. I support your intentions, Mr. President, the intention of the gentleman, but I wonder if we can really finesse it in such a way where not just will they the PCA will concentrate not only on coconut products such as copra, but really put their mind, put their gray matter, put their money on things that would strengthen it, like as you say, transportation, multi-cropping, or for that matter, coconut water, and other things. That should be their mandate.
That is correct.
And we should try to get the best and the brightest.
In fact, Mr. President, when I was, again, chair of the PCA, there is actually a portion of the coconut lumber that, not the entire lumber, but for lack of a better term, the premium lumber, which can actually last decades. It can actually be used for building homes that would last. It's endemic, indigenous. It is an indigenous material, and they say can even be and it's even stronger than metal because it doesn't rust. In other words, with the right technology and the right science, Mr. President, we can actually use the cocoa lumber for homes that are that will be sturdy and long-lasting, Mr.
In
President.
fact, Mr. President, this representation heads the Red Cross in the Philippines. And I get money from the international community of the Red Cross or the Federation, where I'm a governor of the International Federation. And with the money that they gave us, we use cocoa lumber.
That is correct.
And we have already built over 140,000 homes. In Yolanda alone, 78,000. I'm not saying that's to crow over it, but we use cocoa lumber. In fact, we have a hard time, Mr. President. PCA gets in the way. There are a lot of fallen trees.
The debris, yes, Mr.
And
President.
if they rot, they're useless.
That's correct.
Why can we not say, in cases of disasters, humanitarian organizations that intend to build homes can now pick up these trees right away and report post facto what they picked up, instead of giving them a very bad time trying to pick up the trees. In the meantime, we lose the war, and now the cost of the house has jumped up.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And it's really tragic that we don't think about these things, because we could have built a lot more houses, because every time that we build, it gets higher and higher. And again, middlemen come in. Yung malalakas sa PCA, they get the lakad power to make it happen for them. Sa kanila kami mapipilitan bumili. At lugi naman yung mahihirap, because instead of providing them with other things, basic house and comfort rooms na lang ang maibibigay, and water, samantalang kung mabilis yung coconut tree na bumaksak, maibibigay. That's one of my first observations. The second observation is, when you were in the Coconut Authority, or when the gentleman was in the Coconut Authority, there were several typhoons, like Typhoon Pablo. And the coconut trees fell like pickup sticks as I flew over Davao Oriental, those places that were affected. And I don't know, did the Philippine Coconut Authority immediately come up with a replanting program for those fallen trees? Or for that matter, in Yolanda? Or for that matter, in the recent typhoon? Doon sa Bicol, ano ba yan? Nene ba yan? Or whatever. We have so many of them.
Yes.
And I see all the time fallen trees. Or in Cagayan de Oro, a lot of trees were fallen. I have never seen the Philippine Coconut Authority come up with an emergency program to allow the farmer to plant new trees, new seeds. And at the same time, as they're doing that, pinapasok na natin yung black pepper, yung cacao, yung kupe,
That's
black
correct.
pepper, and all that. Because they're Visayans. That's how they pronounce it. Para maintindihan tayo. But that is the case, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, we agree. In fact, for the information of the good senator, I came in after Pablo as chairman of the PCA, and after Yolanda, and we were surprised to, as I came in, there was still 1.8 billion. I came in 2014, Mr. President. There was still 1.8 billion worth of Yolanda funds that had not been spent because, well, for some reason, and that's why we had to do some catching up. There were like 10 million trees that were felled by Yolanda, and it took some time, Mr. President, before the debris clearing was undertaken, but we had to fast track it. And we had to employ, as correctly pointed out by the good senator, it was slow. And we had to employ a new technique, and we had to ensure a new technique in cutting these trees so that we could finally clear these Yolanda-stricken areas in Region 8 of the debris. And we were able to achieve it, Mr. President, but it meant that I had to go to Region 8 every 3 weeks for 3 months or 4 months just to get the latest in terms of the debris management, in terms of debris targets. We really had to push the PCA to move, and and when they knew that I would be back 3 weeks later, I would ask for updates. That forced their hand in that respect, Mr. President, and had to deliver.
So in reality, Mr. President, it is up to the leadership. We
That
can
is correct.
create another bureaucracy, pero kung marupok ang leadership, mahina ang leadership, wala mangyayari. So kailangan talaga, you need a whip, so to speak,
That is correct, Mr. President. In the
para
same,
magawa lahat yung program. Because I'm looking at the budget of the Philippine Coconut Authority, and there's a report here that says PCA was found to be underspending when their allocated budget expanded to 4 billion per year in 2014 to 2015. The agency lacks the capacity to absorb and utilize large funds.
yes, Mr. President.
So having said that, it might be a better way, a better mousetrap, if we delegate some of these powers to the SUCCs in the area so that they can immediately use the funds and make them accountable as we go along. Would you agree with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we are willing to see the proposal to be able to strengthen or expand or provide the necessary synergy between the PCA and other agencies or offices like an SU.
In fact, Mr. President, even as I speak here, when we try to solve the so-called EJK killings, and we have that all the time, it would be the recommendation of this representation, and I've asked if I could ask the majority floor leader and the president if I could already sponsor what we have recommended, and if we could pass on the report of the Committee on Justice so I can already sponsor, for example, surveying every killing in every province that must be reported to the Committee on Justice and Public Order, so that if you have 200 killings in one area, then you know you could actually go right away and attack them right away, so that it doesn't have to go higher, so that we would not have the opprobrium of the international community. And I would like to reiterate that as a commercial here while I'm conducting my interpellation. And I can see, and I'm glad that both gentlemen, the President and the Majority Floor Leader, are nodding their heads, because we really have to see our way clear in making this decision. And going back to the matter at hand, if you had the same situation here, if you're able, let's say, to give the SUCCs the kind of money that they would have, and they would have a scorecard at every month, every quarter, they will be able to report how many farmers they have educated, how much have they distributed in terms of black pepper or cacao or coffee, then we will know na may nangyayari. Kung hindi makaya, we cannot wait until the crow has white feathers. So to my mind, these are the things that I think will make this proposal move, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we will, at the proper time, we will look at the proposed amendments as to how, in terms of structure and organization, and we are more than willing to make the necessary accommodations.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you look at the Kaanib Coconut Intercropping Program, they had 155.98 million. Seems like a very paltry amount. They raised it to 200 million. But we don't know what has happened to these amounts. It would be nice if the SUCCs would be able to monitor what the PCA gave and say, all right, ilan na naitanim nyo, ilan na ngayon ang kinikita ng farmer. Would that be possible, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, the Kaanib program is the PCA's providing farm inputs, equipment to the small land holdings, Mr. President. So that amount of 200 million would include decorticating machines, fertilizers, ano pang binibigay nila? Seedlings, Mr. President, and the like. We're more than willing, again, Mr. President, to look at the proposed amendments in order for the strengthening of the organization, Mr. President, to achieve that.
Just a point of information for the body, Mr. President. We lost 15 million trees in Yolanda alone. That's an awful lot of coconuts. 15 million trees in Yolanda alone. And that is in a very poor community, which
Yes.
explains why among the poorest provinces, coconut regions are represented by 4 provinces, including Tacloban, Maguindanao, Leyte, ano pa? Southern Tagalog, Quezon, Bicol.
Bicol.
So you can see there is the urgency needed to address this problem.
Yes, Mr. President.
I would support the gentleman if we would go and push harder so that we can get life change. You know, politicians always say life will change. But, you know, the president cannot do that alone.
Yes.
Congress can do that, and we should, you know, make sure all our bases are covered so that you can seal all the holes where the rats in this country can go in and out and do their plunder upon us. And so, having said that, Mr. President, let me just go back now to an old issue. And this is the matter of the people who were contributed to the levy. I have here documents from the United Coconut Planters Bank that appears to be like shares of stock. And this was in return for, this was taken from Unicom, UCPB, 54 shares, UCPB, 16 shares, to a certain Demetrio Reyes Tolentino, who gave 88 shares, 71 shares, or a total of 1,257 shares. I guess they are brothers, Demetrio Tolentino. No, they're one and the same. They have a total of 1,257 or 1,500 shares, Mr. President. And I have the documentation here. Can they now go back to the government? The government having said, the Supreme Court having said that this is in the form of taxes.
Yes, Mr.
And
President.
therefore, it belongs to the government now.
Yes, Mr. President.
So what do we do with the poor farmers who were swindled, so to speak, in quotes?
Well, Mr. President, the Supreme Court ruling precisely said that the levy was in the form of a tax, and therefore it cannot be, it is government funds rather, and cannot be given to private persons in that respect, Mr. President. In fact, if I recall correctly, the Supreme Court also ruled that the issuance of these shares of stock was invalid, Mr. President. And therefore, well, the strategy really now should be, moving forward, is to get a survey of the registry of all coconut farmers and make sure that the fund will be made available to the development of the coconut enterprises, for example, and these farmers and their organizations will be the beneficiaries, Mr. President.
Well, when the government says the issuance shares of stock were improperly done, this is right under the noses of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which means that these were a violation of the securities law. Would you say so? And which means that the government was remiss. And the theory being the government was not doing its job. It created by their negligence a humongous swindle, if you will.
Well, Mr. President, at that time, there was we would like to think that it was a presidential decree that that allowed for this, and the decision of the board, and so there was in that sense, a presumption of regularity until the courts intervene, Mr.
But
President.
you know, it's all post facto, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. President.
And in the meantime, the government failed to protect the farmer
That
or
is
the
co-
people who were swindled.
That is correct, Mr. President.
And is there any light at the end of the tunnel for these people who have grown old with their shares of stock,
Mr.
holding mere scraps of paper?
Well, Mr. President, with respect to individuals per se, the money cannot be allocated to them. But the Senator Cynthia Villar had requested that we put social protection appropriations. This would be could be healthcare, Mr. President, could be insurance, could be scholarships, Mr. President.
Well-
So that would be the manner in which you would be able to address that, although not directly, Mr.
You know, this can be akin to a problem that happened after World War II, when the President Roosevelt said any Filipino who takes up arms against the Japanese will be given veterans benefits.
That is correct.
And of course, after World War II, this was announced, and a lot of people went in, hundreds of thousands who didn't really fight the war were suddenly now representing that they fought in the war for America and for the Philippines. And so much so that they rescinded the proclamation of President Roosevelt because the Americans were able to document what they called the Missouri List, that listed down all the veterans, the properly documented and properly how do I say it, properly recognized veterans. Having said that, Mr. President, can we not do the same here?
Well, Mr. President, I'm more than willing to look at a proposal, Mr. President, that should not be in violation, of course, of the ruling of the Supreme Court. That's why we felt that perhaps the social protection allocation, budgetary appropriation or allocation for social protection, such as scholarships, health care for our coconut farmers, would be one such track. But I'm willing to look at a proposal that, as long as it's consistent with and will not eventually be declared as unconstitutional, we're more than willing to figure out if such is possible, Mr.
Well,
President.
Mr. President, I just want it out because I think I had to bring it out. You know, I have this bad habit. And I see things that are wrong, I don't keep quiet. And I always say what is in my heart. That has guided me well through the years of service to my country. And the times that I hesitated were the times I was wrong. So I will not hesitate on this matter. So thank you very much, Mr. President, and I hope that you'll favor me with the amendments that we're going to propose so that you can have a better law insofar as this is concerned.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will ask our committee secretary and our staff to coordinate with your staff so that we can look at how we can craft the amendments as manifested during the or expressed during the interpellation. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Gordon.
Thank you, gentlemen. Majority Leader?
So two more, Pacquiao and
Senator Pacquiao is here.
Thank you. May I have a 1 minute suspension, Mr.
A
President?
minute suspension.
either March 15 o ano, or before June, before May 31. Si SP na lang. We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we elect Senator Francis Pangilinan as chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws.
Any objection? There being none, Senator Pangilinan is hereby elected as the new chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
That automatically replaces the now minority leader,
Yes, sir.
Senator Dillon, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of House Bill 4631 under Committee Report Number 36.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved, and House Bill 4631 under Committee Report Number 36 is under consideration.
Mr. President, this is the measure renewing for another 25 years the franchise to GMA Network. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we already terminated the period of committee amendments. May we therefore move on to the period of individual amendments. I so move, Mr. President, that we open the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? There being none, we are now in the period of individual amendments.
For the individual amendments to be introduced, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe. And first to introduce individual amendments, Senator Ping Lacson.
Senator Poe and Senator Lacson are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the distinguished sponsor of this measure will allow, I have only one amendment.
It's my pleasure, Mr. President.
On page 3, between lines 19 and 20, insert the following paragraph. Public service time referred herein shall not be less than 10% of the paid commercials or advertisements per hour, comma, which shall be allocated based on need to the executive, comma, legislative, comma, judiciary, comma, and the constitutional commissions, period. The National Telecommunications Commission, or NTC, shall issue rules and regulations for this purpose.
May I know, Senator Lacson, where the amendment starts?
That's page 3 between lines 19 and 20. Insert the following paragraph, which I just mentioned.
Okay, so it will be an additional paragraph to section 4. Is that correct, sir?
Section 4.
Yes, sir.
That is correct, Mr. President.
May we know the response of the sponsor?
May I read, may I ask the good gentleman to please read again the addition that he proposes?
Insert the following paragraph on page 3 between lines 19 and 20.
Can we read the
Yeah.
paragraph, Mr. President?
Public service time referred herein shall not be less than 10% of the paid commercials or advertisements per hour, comma, which shall be allocated based on need to the executive, comma, legislative, comma, judiciary, comma, and the constitutional commissions, period. The National Telecommunications Commission, or NTC, open close parenthesis, NTC, shall issue rules and regulations for this purpose, period.
Mr. President, I commend the gentleman from Cavite for his efforts also to reform certain acts that certain policies, especially by the media, with regards to allowing more public service announcements and giving equal exposure to everyone. It's truly commendable. However, I'm also a bit cautious, and I'd like this for the record, that with this particular provision that will apply to the franchise of GMA 7, in the meantime that the other networks are not renewing their franchise yet, they will not be bound by the same provision. On the other hand, there's also been another school of thought that might advise us to have a separate broadcasting code that will encompass the other networks to comply with the same requirement, as opposed to just tailoring it in this particular franchise bill. That is actually my reservation, Mr. President. On the other hand, I know that the intention of the good senator is really for reforms. This is something that should have been included to begin with in the COMELEC law.
Mr. President, this will apply to all franchise renewals in the future. For example, ABS-CBN will be renewing their franchise sometime in 2020. And this will be applicable to all broadcast media who will renew their franchise. If the concern of the distinguished sponsor if this violative of the equality clause, then I would like to assuage, in case that's your apprehension or reservation, that there is a Supreme Court ruling in this regard. It is in the declaration of the Supreme Court in the case of Telecommunications and Broadcast Attorneys of the Philippines versus GMA, incidentally, and GMA versus COMELEC, wherein the franchise grantee, GMA, is a party. Article 12, 11, or Section 11 of the Constitution authorizes the amendment of franchises for the common good. What better measure can be conceived for the common good than one for free airtime for the benefit, it says here, because it involves the COMELEC, not only of candidates but even more of the public, particularly the voters, so that they will be fully informed of the issues in an election. It is the right of the viewers and listeners, not the right of the broadcasters, which is paramount. In another portion of the decision, the government must, of necessity, allocate broadcast frequencies to those wishing to use them. There is no similar justification for government allocation and regulation of the print media. In the allocation of limited resources, relevant conditions may validly be imposed on the grantees or licensees. The reason for this is that, as already noted, the government spends public funds for the allocation and regulation of the broadcast industry, which it does not do in the case of the print media. To require the radio and television broadcast industry to provide free air time for the COMELEC time is a fair exchange for what the industry gets.
Mr. President, I have no doubt again that, well, of course, a franchise is a privilege granted to them. In other countries, as I have mentioned, the franchise holders will have to pay billions to the government to have that right. In our country, we don't require them to do so, except the taxes that they pay. So, but I would just like to be cautious about it, again, because other networks, as also mentioned by one of our colleagues here, will not be up for renewal until, like ABS won't be up for renewal until 2020. Senator Ralph had mentioned that the elections will be again 2019. Will GMA 7 have to comply with this new ruling, but the other networks who are not yet up for a franchise renewal will not have the same opportunity, so, or will not have the same requirement. So it might be a little bit disadvantageous. On the other hand, if we're thinking of the long term, Mr. President, I mean, again, it is the prerogative of the government. So I'm actually, I would rather have, rather have the voice of our collegial body and find out. And
This is not a threat, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I did the rounds of our colleagues, and I'm confident, I believe, that I have the numbers. So if you will not accept this amendment, again, this is not a threat, we'll put this into a vote.
Mr. President, even if he says it's not a threat, if it's uttered by the gentleman from Cavite, it is almost a threat. But
In fact, I made sure that I really have the numbers, because I don't want to be mentally dishonest to you, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor. The minority bloc, all 5 of them, agreed that they will support this measure. And Senator Risa is here, who can attest to that commitment made by the minority bloc. The seatmates, I approached them one by one. They also assured me that they will support the measure. Senator Legarda, Senator Honasan, Senator Nancy Binay, who unfortunately left earlier, but if it will be put into a vote, she requested that I request for suspension because she wants to vote in favor of this amendment, Mr. President.
oh, Mr. President, I don't question the integrity of
Thank you,
the
Mr.
gentleman
President.
from Cavite. That's why when he says something, we know that he means it. On the other hand, I just want to make sure that when he was doing the rounds, nobody was under duress. No, but,
I assure you.
okay, so, Mr. President,
Senator Recto, please, with the permission of the lady and
Mr.
gentleman.
President, with the permission of the distinguished lady and my member in the majority, with their permission, Mr. President, just a clarification. When is the franchise of ABS-CBN expected to come to Congress for a renewal?
from what we know, although admittedly I don't know exactly the date, but sometime around before 2020.
2020. What about Channel 5?
March 13, 2020.
Also,
March 30, 2020.
2020. Channel 5. So both in 2020.
Definitely after.
After.
GMA 7.
Yes. And the amendment of the gentleman would impose an additional condition on the franchise of Channel 7. And the amendments are in relation to amending the Fair Election Act. Is that correct? No?
No.
Definitely not, Mr. President. This will apply to the executive branch, legislative branch, even the judicial branch.
Okay.
And the constitutional commissions, including the COMELEC.
For the 10% of airtime.
10% of the paid commercials.
Okay? 10%.
For the information of the gentleman, the average period of paid commercials on a per hour basis is 20 minutes. So what government is only asking is 2 minutes per hour, or 10% of the 20 minutes.
Will this be used in the 2019 elections? Because I heard reference to an elections in 2019.
No, not necessarily. I just read a Supreme Court ruling, which incidentally involved the COMELEC.
Mr. President, if I may we put in record that the rules and regulations drafted by NTC should be applicable to all broadcasting companies, taking into account that Section 4, responsibility to the public, is found in all broadcasting franchises. So, from what I understand, if the NTC requires, if the NTC will create implementing rules that will require other networks to do so, even if it's not found in their franchise yet, GMA 7, ABS-CBN, and TV5 will have to comply.
Well, thank you for the clarification, Mr. President.
Is there no other approach, for example, coming up with a law which will now specifically state that the franchises of the following entities are deemed amended? Is that possible?
Mr. President, this representation maintains that this is our best time and opportunity to give to the government what is due to the government. After this, we're waiting for another 25 years for another renewal. And I think it's right, as the distinguished sponsor aptly mentioned, that a franchise is a privilege. And since government is also spending, it's but right that we give at least 10% of their paid, the time allocated for their paid commercial, for the paid commercials. This won't, it's just a trickle in the bucket, so to speak. If we take away 2 minutes of the 20 minutes per hour paid commercials, and this will apply to the other broadcast media, other stations that will renew their contract. If the fear is there's constitutional infirmity, I would like to assure. That's why I read into the records the Supreme Court ruling in this regard, Mr. President.
But
Actually, Mr. President, if I may add, there's already this Section 4. But Section 4 only mentions adequate, reasonable. That's why during the committee hearing, I asked for a definition of adequate and reasonable, because these terms are very subjective and relative. So I asked for a definition or clarification on those terms, and no less than the President and CEO, Chairman ba? President and CEO of GMA 7 admitted that there's vagueness in Section 4 of this bill, of the House bill. So I mentioned that at the proper time, I would like to introduce an amendment to provide specificity as to what constitutes public service time. And this is it, Mr. President. Now, if our colleagues whom I have talked to will have a change of heart because of the intervention of Senator Recto, I'm willing to be defeated on the floor, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President, just
Senator Recto.
one final point on the matter. My thinking here is that it would be like an additional imposition, like an additional tax to GMA, which will not affect Channel 2 until their franchise is renewed, Channel 5, and maybe other stations as well. So 10%, that would be like 10% of their gross earnings in additional imposition. Whereas this will not apply to the other franchise holders.
To be fair, Mr. President, I'm willing to yield to the wisdom of the Senate President, being a lawyer in good standing, a bar top notcher of that. No? Probably we can insert a proviso, if it is possible legally, that we can suspend the application of this provision for 2 years, or say 3 years, if it is possible. If not, then I will stand on this amendment, Mr. President.
I was thinking of an approach where we make the amendment the subject matter of a separate law, and then making it applicable to all players in the industry.
In that case, I will just call for a vote on this
Yes.
amendment, Mr. President. If the sponsor will
Yes,
not
the sponsor
accept-
has not given us a categorical answer yet as to her stand.
Mr. President.
Yes, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, before I put in my opinion, I would just like to remind the body that I have already made a disclosure on the GMA franchise. But for the record, I'd like to say that I do support the proposal of Senator Lacson, his amendment. But my problem is that it has to be all. It cannot just be GMA. It has to be effective to all radio, TV, cable stations. It's like singling out a network, all because their franchise is up to date. But what about those whose franchises will be 3 years from now? Agrabyado sila doon sa mga network na yun. That is the problem that I have. But I support the proposal, but the timing and the problem is inequality. Just for the record, Mr. President, so that perhaps we can come to a middle ground or something like that.
I'm all for fairness, Mr. President. That's why I suggested, if it's legally possible, that we can suspend implementation of this particular amendment if approved if accepted or approved by the body, Mr. President, if it's possible.
Mr. President, I really sympathize with the proposal of the good senator from Cavite. And I have no doubt that he's convinced the majority of our colleagues to see his point, as I see it as well. On the other hand, even if we have the proviso of 3 years, there's no guarantee that at the time of deliberation for the other franchises, that other conditions might be applicable to them. This particular provision it depends on the whim also of our colleagues at the time. It might not be included, so a separate law might be more definitive. It's not that I don't trust the gentleman. On the other hand, and again, personally, I see the point because they're making a killing. I mean, so to speak, they're really making a killing out of this venture. And the government should be happy also that they are profitable, but at the same time, the government should get its fair share for the people. So that there won't be any doubt as to the position of each and every colleague, I think it's better that we put it to a vote so that it's clear in the minds of everyone, and they'll probably have enough time today to think about it.
Some of our colleagues are in the lounge. May I call for a quorum?
So, Senator Recto, then Senator Honasan. Yes, Senator Recto?
Just a final manifestation on the issue. and maybe a clarificatory question as well. How much news airtime does Channel 7 have for news programs and public affairs programs, Mr. President?
Sir, I'm sorry, Mr. President, could you repeat the
Yeah,
question?
Channel 7 not only pays taxes, not only does it taxes on income, on VAT, local government taxes. We're talking here about airtime, withholding wages, it creates jobs, collects withholding taxes, provides also public services programs like the news program. Now, yung news at public affairs program, ilan minutes yan sa isang araw?
Yes, Mr. President, during the weekdays, there are 8 newscasts during the day between GMA7 and its other affiliate channels. And they also have documentary pieces, actually. I've witnessed some of those.
Correct. So how many minutes are those?
Well, let's just say 8 of them are at about like an hour time slot minus the ad. So let's say 40 minutes average times
In
8.
a day, times 8?
Times 8, so you're like 320 minutes. Am I correct?
All of that
Times
would be
8, 320
considered as
minutes.
public affairs programs, is that correct?
Well, they are labeled as public affairs programs, yes.
Okay. Is that part of the minutes counted?
That is a gray area too, Mr. President. Actually, I think that
Because that is for the public good.
but I think that the provision that Senator Ping is talking about is 10% of the ads sold.
No, I
So-
understand. I'm looking for a middle ground here. Kung ibibilang natin yun, depending on the number of how many public affairs programs they have and how many minutes, I'm just looking for something here.
That's right, Mr. President. That's defensible. They can say that that's already our public service compliance.
That's right.
So it needs to be a little clearer, I suppose.
Okay?
If we count, Mr. President, if we count the news affairs programs, including the live coverage of hearings here in the Senate, may utang pa tayo sa kanila. Baka tayo pa magbayad.
Mr. President, and I am not planning to amend the bill na magbayad pang gobyerno sa GMA, but having said that, I think we should consider the public service programs also of Channel 7, and for that matter, all the other broadcast stations.
Mr. President, I think
So
if
it's
I
not only
may...
the paying of taxes, it is also providing that content for public service, live broadcasts of news, so on and so forth, that help educate the public.
But, Mr. President, maybe this one is like an on-demand
Government time.
requirement by the government time, on-demand time. It's not at the discretion of the network.
Yes.
Because these news programs that they have, although we concede it to be public service, it's still with their prerogative. This one is really mandated by the government. In fact, even the content to be shown will be decided by the government.
I totally understand those points. What I'm just trying to drive at is that they do also perform a responsibility to the public.
I accept, Mr.
And they
President.
devote
I
a lot of
recognize
this
that.
airtime for this purpose. That's only it, Mr. President.
Senator Nasa? Of course, with the permission of the lady and
Thank
the
you, Mr.
gentleman.
President. With the permission of the gentle lady sponsor and Senator Lacson. Madam Sponsor, I'm not part of the threat.
You are the threat, Mr. President.
No, I'm sure the proponent of the amendment has a clear sense of this amendment to the effect that it is a regulatory intervention. But I was thinking in other terms, Mr. President, with your permission, to add value to the discussion before we put it to a vote. No? I was looking at Section 14, the Equality Clause. Maybe, prospectively, Madam Sponsor, I was thinking of a reverse equality clause. No? That would probably put some issues to rest. No? I was planning to add on page 7, with the permission of Senator Lacson, after line 18, we could probably, subject to style, insert the sentence, the public service time provided in section 4 hereof shall be required similarly from all other radio and television franchise holders. But Madam Sponsor, I'll not ask for a response. No? I will leave that discretion to the good lady sponsor and Senator Lacson. But I was thinking more in terms of the overall direction towards self-regulation. Madam Sponsor, when we were deliberating the Freedom of Information Bill, we agreed with this concept that the movement should be towards self-regulation. Lahat po kasi, ma'am, takot sa media. Di ba? The rule is, especially among us politicians, you do not argue against somebody holding a microphone who is in prime time TV. No? But I was going to ask, I'm not implying anything. Towards that end, is GMA7 a member of the KBP?
No, Mr. President, they are not. They opted out of that.
Okay. If we are trying to regulate the industry and we are applying the equality clause, which is, I understand, a basic constitutional principle, how then would this movement towards self-regulation kick in if GMA7 is not a member of KBP? I do not require a reply, Madam Sponsor. No? I'm just putting that on the table para we can go beyond the percentages that are implied in these proposed amendments. No? Of course, I would probably ask in my mind, why did they opt not to be a member of KBP? Are they the minority or the majority? How many other franchise holders? Because mahirap po kasi, ma'am, yung magkikita-kita lang tayo every 25 years, and that's the only time we raise these issues. Mr. President, I wanted to put that on the table with the permission of the good lady sponsor and Senator Lacson, para we can enrich the discussions, and we can probably make long-term policy decisions based on complete, accurate, and timely information. Salamat po. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
That's
Mr.
noted,
President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, may I have a 1-minute suspension? I move for a 1-minute suspension. Mr.
If there is
President.
no objection, session suspended. Basic pa na mga Tanong mo kung pwede pa si Joel yung amendment niya.
Yes, po.
During the interpellation. Hindi, bukas na yan. Pag sinuspend yung suspend, mabibitin yung expo. Parang may withdraw yung pangit.
Yung sa higher education, wala na si Bang. Kasi kung ano ngayon, accepted na naman lahat ito. Hindi ka nang babasa.
Dito siya accepted na to eh, sigurado. Isang sentence.
What's up? We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, during the suspension, I had a conversation with the proponent of the amendment, Senator Panfilo Lacson, and the chairman, Senator Grace Poe. It seems that there is a possibility that the the proponent of the amendment would probably accept if the issue on equality, if the proposal would be after 3 years or 2 years or whatever. But as I said, no, we're used to having a sunset provision in our laws. This time, this is a sunrise provision, Mr. President. So I have asked for their concurrence. I will move to suspend consideration of the measure with that pending question at hand, and ask the legal team of the Secretariat to look into this possibility of a sunrise provision, no? Effective after so and so.
Yeah.
So
Yes, sir.
with that on the record, Mr. President, so that we can take it up again tomorrow, right after the caucus, Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of House Bill
Mr. President.
4631.
Senator Lacson?
I just want to put it on record that I'm not anti-GMA. I'm pro-government. That's all, Mr. President. I'm not
Yes.
doing this because I have, you know, in fact, the chairman, the president, and CEO is a friend of mine. No?
Yes.
And, anti-Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, but not anti-GMA. Thank you, Mr. President.
Was that clear enough? That was clear enough? Okay.
Yes,
So,
I think that was clear enough.
We go back now to the motion to suspend.
Suspend
The
consideration.
commitment is that when we resume with that issue on the floor.
Hindi legal pangit. May naka-pending question, merong ano
We resume with that situation on the floor where there was a proposed amendment and not accepted by the sponsor.
Yes, that is the situation. That is why, even if Senator Joel Villanueva is ready with this individual amendment, the problem of the majority leader, Mr. President, is that there is a pending question.
Right.
And the only way we can tackle the other amendment is if the proponent withdraws.
Yes.
But it's pending, so we cannot do that.
Subo na ako rito. I cannot withdraw anymore.
Yeah, I know. That's
Masamang
why, Mr.
tingnan pag
President.
nag-withdraw ako rito.
Yes, Mr. President, I know. That's why
I think Senator Villanueva wants to be heard. Yes.
Mr. President, I would subscribe to the wisdom of the majority leader, and I just want to put on record that we are ready to introduce our individual amendments.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
we'll consider that tomorrow, Mr.
So
President.
there's a pending,
yes,
there's a pending motion now to suspend consideration of House Bill number 4631. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Oh, ito na, Joel. Pwede ka pa? Anti-discrimination, pwede ka pa? Ha? 3 minutes, wag na. We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Minute suspension. Wala na si Bam?
No, yung sa labor ako eh. But okay na eh, kausap ko si Akala ko nga may gusto. Akala ko yung sinasabi mo ngayon, na yung 3
Yeah, oh. Baka unahin na natin yung TMA o makapagputuhan. Yes, pangalawa. Gusto ni Jay sana emergency powers, pero pakiusapan lang natin.
Hindi, yung higher education, kumandatama, in-accept niya naman lahat ito, partner. Kasi hindi na.
May copy na ba kayo ng proposed amendment? Pinatype ko eh, so kunin nyo na lang. Ayun, pinatype ko, pa-print nyo. Pinatype nila eh.
May committee amendment ka ba?
We ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 462 under Committee Report Number 16.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the practice of speech-language pathology.
The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. May we then recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes, and to interpellate the Majority Leader, Mr. President.
So Senator Trillanes as the sponsor and Senator Soto as interpolator are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman yield to some questions on the bill, Senate Bill 1238, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
In layman's terms, Mr. President, what is exactly speech-language pathology? Nung una ko pong narinig ito, medyo napag-isip ako ng mga ilang segundo eh. So may we spread into the record what we mean by speech-language pathology?
Mr. President, officially, based on the bill that we are sponsoring, on page 1, line 14, under the section of definition of terms, speech-language pathology shall mean an allied medical profession devoted to the evaluation, diagnosis, management, and prevention of human communication disorder. Mr. President.
Ang operative word sa akin doon, yung disorder eh.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, can you give us an example of such disorders, Mr. President?
Mr. President, among the examples of human communication disorder ay yung tinatawag na nabubulol o yung nauutal or stuttering. These are some examples, Mr. President.
What about a person suffering from Tourette syndrome? Is that also included?
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Yes.
In addition, just to qualify, Mr. President, a person who would have a Tourette syndrome would have the communication disorder. So the speech-language pathologist would address the communication disorder component, Mr. President. Dahil yung Tourette syndrome sa
All right. Now, the practice of speech-language pathology, Mr. President, I definitely would like to be of help. No? Let us place on record, Mr. President, the necessity. Why is it necessary to regulate the pathology itself, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, based on the need alone, there is an estimated 20 to 23 million Filipinos who are suffering the disorder, Mr. President, and there is no regulated profession at the moment, and without any regulation, there is the tendency for some quack doctors to come in and pretend to be able to address the disorder, Mr. President.
All right. I definitely understand that, Mr. President, because one of my grandsons has Tourette syndrome. That's why I'm very interested about the matter, Mr. President. So at present, how many language or speech-language pathologists do we have? Are they licensed in our country? And how many are they, Mr. President?
Mr. President, there are no licensed speech-language pathologists at the moment, since we have yet to regulate the profession, but there are 800 graduates, Mr. President. over the past 25 years.
In the Philippines?
In the
They've
Philippines.
studied in the Philippines?
Yes, Mr.
I
President.
see. Are there, is the speech language pathology given in our government institutions, our state universities and colleges? Or mostly private?
Mostly private, but there are those in the public sector, Mr. President.
So, presently, Mr. President, if there are no licensed speech language pathologists, how is it being supervised right now? Or is, if ever it is being regulated?
Well, by law, there is nothing official, but they're being supervised or organized through the association. Yeah. Through the association, Mr. President.
There is an association of speech language pathologists.
Yes, Mr.
All right. So, would in this law, in this bill, I mean, are we making a registration as a speech language pathologist a prerequisite before one can practice the said profession?
Yes, Mr. President. They will be registered, and eventually they will have the board exam. Then after that, they'll be incorporated in this accredited, integrated professional organization, Mr. President.
There will be an exam, board examinations also. But,
Yes.
well, the way I understand Section 15, it allows a speech language pathologist to register without passing the examination. Wouldn't this provision defeat the purpose of the examination, and eventually we might be affecting the quality of the speech language pathologist?
Well, Mr. President, it's since this is the first regulatory law as regards this profession, there would be a grandfather clause, or those who are practicing at the present would be exempted. But after that, they would need to undergo or to take the board exam, Mr. President.
Well, I see your point, but I do not understand it that way in the way Section 15 is written. So perhaps, as a matter of fact, I was about to ask you why this provision is added. Perhaps we could try to formulate an amendment to clarify that particular answer you gave for Section 15, Mr. President.
Most definitely, Mr. President,
All right.
the sponsor is open to the ideas of the majority leader.
Ano? May I have a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Minute suspension.
Kaya natin ilagay dito? Proposal amendment? Proposal amendment? Isang question lang. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I was just, I have to go back to the point at hand in Section 15, but perhaps I would be able to be clarified, or perhaps the gentleman from BICO will accept an amendment when it, during the period of individual amendments to clarify Section 15, the way he has explained it to this representation, Mr. President, if you don't mind. So I will move on to one final question. May we know the funding requirement for the implementation of this measure? Did we consider this in the General Appropriations Act for 2017, Mr. President?
Mr. President, it's not included in the General Appropriations Act for 2017. So there would be a funding shall be included in the General Appropriations Act only after the approval. Yes, 2018, Mr. President.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. President. I will terminate my interpellation and thank the gentleman for answering my questions. I will try to formulate my proposed amendment now, Mr. President. So in the meantime, there is no other senator who have proposed amendment, reserved for
Senator
interpellation. No, it's an amendment, Mr.
Amendment
President.
also, okay.
So I move to terminate the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, we terminate the period for interpellations.
I move to open the period of committee amendments if there are any committee amendments.
So any objection? There being none, motion is approved. We are now in the period of committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 1, line 14, delete the word medical after the word allied, and in lieu thereof, replace the same with the word health. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
On page 3, line 10, delete the words speech language pathologist after the word licensed, and in lieu thereof, replace the same with the words allied health professional. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 7, line 26, paragraph E, between the words language and disorders, insert the words and cognitive communication. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, between lines 28 and 29, insert the new letter H, which shall read as H, cleft lip and palate and craniofacial conditions. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
There are no more committee amendments, Mr. President.
Majority Leader?
Move to close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, we close the period for committee amendments.
Move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we recognize Senator Sherwin Gatchalian?
Thank
to
you,
propose his
Mr.
individual
President.
Senator
amendment.
Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I propose the following individual amendments to Senate Bill 462 under Committee Report number 16 on page 1, section 1, line 2. Delete 2016 and replace it with 2017.
Sponsor?
The amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The last one is on page 2, section 3, line 8. Insert a new subsection D, which shall read, swallowing disorders as addressed by speech-language pathologist shall include difficulties in management of a solid or liquid bolus in the oral, pharyngeal, and or laryngeal stages of feeding. Mr. President, I move that the Secretariat go over the entire text of the bill and subject to style.
What does the sponsor say? to
The
this?
amendment is accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. The renumbering of the subsection should follow. The relettering is.
Mr. President, to continue with the period of individual amendments, may I propose to the distinguished gentleman on section 15, on line 22, after the word organization and the period.
Excuse me, sir? Section.
Page 8, sorry.
Ah,
Page 8,
yes.
section 15,
Yes.
line 22, after the period, after organization. All right, a new sentence. Provided, however, that the registration without examination shall only be applied to the graduates of speech-language pathology prior to the effectivity of this act, period. Will the distinguished gentleman accept the amendment, Mr. President?
Can we make sure that the line is accurate, because
Okay,
it does not start on line 22 in my
I
copy.
move to suspend, Mr. President.
Session is suspended. Line ano ba yun? 22 sabi ko. Section 15. 15. Section 15. Iba copy mo? Section 22.
Tama. Okay na, mali. Mali tayo. Ready to resume, Mr.
Session is
President.
resumed. Majority Leader.
I was looking at the wrong copy, Mr. President. I was looking at the original bill that was filed before the committee report, so I beg your indulgence. I withdraw the proposed amendment on section 15.
So-
The current section 15 contains what I want to say, Mr. President.
It's clear enough.
It's clear enough.
Yes. The withdrawal is noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? There being none, we close the period of for individual amendments.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 462 under Committee Report Number 16.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 462 under Committee Report number 16 is approved on second reading.
I move to suspend consideration of 462 under Committee Report Number 16.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Wala. Oh, mali pala yun. Tama. Okay. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Mr. President, upon the request of the President Pro Temp, Senator Ralph Recto, and it is contained in his letter, I move for the withdrawal of his authorship to proposed resolution of both houses number 2, entitled Resolution of both houses of Congress proposing amendments to certain restrictive economic provisions in the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, specifically on Articles 12, 14, and 16 thereof. I move, Mr. President. I so move.
The motion, the manifestation is noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, March 1, 2017.
Any objection? Hearing none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, March 1, 2017.